on
Yeah,
virgins.
let's pick up. This is going to be 1 Corinthians 7:25. Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. This whole section is going to be about virgins, and it's a little confusing to a Western reader if you don't understand the context. At this day and age, and to this day and age, it's still in many places in the world, a daughter is considered to be, in effect, the property of her father. And so when we're reading about virgins, we're reading about unmarried daughters, and this is actually addressed to their fathers and how the fathers are to deal with the fact that they have unmarried daughters. And so if we understand that reading this, it's going to make a whole lot more sense. And because that's not the way our culture is in this country, we need to look for the larger underlying principles here. And they are here. They're clearly here. But again, there are places. My wife comes from a culture where that's the case. Her father had every expectation that he was going to pick out her husband for her, and was sorely displeased when she picked out her own, and especially when she picked out somebody who wasn't a doctor or an attorney, and of course, the other thing about this particular culture is that communities are much tighter, much more. You don't just say, you know what, there's a good job in Colorado, I'm going to jump in my car and drive 1,000 miles away and take a job there. I'm going to go online and find a girlfriend, or I'm going to meet somebody when I'm off at college, and everything was very close knit, and so marriages were a way to help keep that community identity and that community bond, and they were also a way, honestly, to manage your identity and your heritage. You know, if you could get your daughter married to somebody who was higher up the socioeconomic scale, well, that kind of lifted the whole family up. And so, and so when I say that the daughters are property, I don't mean that quite in the sense of property being just an inanimate object, but I think in a lot of families, in a lot of cases, the daughters really were, first of all, the women in many cultures are not held in as high esteem as men, intellectually, socially, in the workplace, etc. And so,
plus, even in those cultures, even if you read it in the Bible, if you had like a handful of sons, you were rich, because the families all worked together. So
right.
This community pool wealth. So the more sons you had, the more wealthy you were. The more hands you had in the fire.
And so the daughter really became more important as a way to leverage your or help affirm your status in the community, and to bond your family with other families in the community. I don't want to sound too negative about this. It's the way it was for thousands of years. It's the way it is to this day. And but that's the context here. Verse 26. I suppose, therefore, that it is good, because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. And the present distress, he doesn't elaborate on, but the world is very much in a time of transition here, and Paul is very, very, very concerned about as many people going from that Gentile way of life, that pagan way of life, to a Christian way of life and a Christian way of thinking as possible. And that's a stressful cultural change. He's also concerned, I'm sure, about the fact that persecution is starting to arise towards Christians. Also, as we're going to read, Paul may believe that Christ's return is imminent, as in maybe the next few years or the next couple of generations. So it's a stressful time as far as he's concerned. And let's face it, Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace but a sword. Father against son, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. And so he's saying in this context, in this stressful time, in this time of change, I'm making these recommendations. 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. And in this case, we're talking about betrothed. Are you engaged? Have you made a commitment? That process of going from, our dads have gotten together and this man is going to marry this woman, to actually getting married is a very, very unfamiliar process to us. But there was a period of betrothal. You remember Joseph and Mary were betrothed when she became pregnant with Jesus. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Are you currently unaffiliated, unattached, unbetrothed? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. It is very different. It is very, very different being married, and that's the point Paul is making. But he's very good to say right up front, if you do marry, you have not sinned. I mean, this is the institution which God loves. And Jesus, when he's talking about celibacy, he says, this saying is not for everyone. And when God created man, he said it is not fit that man should be alone. But I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Those who weep as though they did not weep. Those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. Those who buy as though they did not possess. And those who use this world as not misusing it. For the form of this world is passing away. And what he is really doing, and he's using virgins, and he's using betrothal, and he's using marriage to underscore this. But what he is, the bottom line here is that as believers, we need to be able to focus as much of our attention and as much of our time and energy, for want of a better phrase, into doing the work of the kingdom, into prayer and fasting, into understanding God's gifts and callings on our lives, into serving the Lord. And he's not saying that if you're married and you're raising children and you have a home and a lot of your time and energy is tied up in domestic things and tending to the business of this world, that you're going to go to hell or that you're sinning. He's just saying that he's just encouraging people to consider that cost. Those who have wives as though they had none. Now, he's not saying if you have a wife, ignore her, disrespect her. He's just saying, even though you are married, you still need to be very aware. What did Jesus say? Jesus said, if you love your wife or your parents or your children or your home or your anything more than me, you're not worthy of me. And so he's saying that even if you are married, your wife is still secondary to your calling to the Lord Jesus Christ. If you weep, this is going to pass quickly. Get over it. So again, you can tend to those things that God created for you. Same with rejoicing. Same with possessions and using the world. Jesus says over in the 14th chapter of Luke, he says, therefore, if you would be my disciple, you must give up all you possess. Some versions say you must give up all you own. And it doesn't mean you can't have a car. It doesn't mean you can't have a home. It just simply means that if that's where your attention is, if that's where you're focused, then your attention and your focus is in the wrong place. Those are simply tools. You don't need to possess them. And that Greek word possess has the connotation of wrapping your arms around something, holding on to something. When those things are going to pass, those things are simply tools, and the real goal is to get in front of the judgment seat and hear God say, well done, good and faithful servant, and for your children to hear that, and for your parents to hear that, and for your neighbors to hear that, and for your friends to hear that, and for your enemies to hear that, for the people you go to church with to hear that, for the people you go to work with to hear that. 32, but I would want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Now, this is a very bold statement. I think there are a lot of people who are born again, who love the Lord, who are serving the kingdom, not necessarily in ministry 24/7. And I'm not convinced that that's what Paul is saying. What he is saying, I think, goes back to Jesus talking about weeds. If you get too distracted by your wife, if you get too distracted by your children, if you get too distracted by your home, those can become weeds, interfering with the fruit that God intended for you to bear. He who is unmarried cares for the things of this Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. And as Carrie alluded to, being married is very, very different. You have priorities. You're obligated to these priorities in your home that you're not obligated to if you're not married, if you don't have a home in that sense. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. This is where he's going. If you're born again, if you have a personal, 24/7 relationship with the Lord, you're going to want to bear as much fruit as you possibly can. You're going to want the Lord to use you as much as you can be used. And having responsibilities to a wife and children and a home and so forth, potentially take time and opportunity away from that. The two are obviously not mutually exclusive. You can, the Bible told us to go forth and multiply. The Bible tells us to raise our children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. In fact, Paul just finished saying, if your wife is an unbeliever, don't leave her if she's willing to stay with you. Set a good example. Pray for her. Let her see the joy and the hope that's in you, in hopes that she too will be saved. And I say this for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you. I'm not ordering anybody not to get married. As Jesus said, this saying is not for everybody. Not everybody is called or gifted to be celibate so that they can be that completely focused on the work of the ministry. One can be married, one can raise children, one can have a home, and still bear a tremendous amount of fruit. I mean, I think of the Billy Grahams and the Vodi Bachams and the Paul Washers and the John MacArthurs of this world. The two are not mutually exclusive, and he's not saying that. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. And he's still talking to the dad. He's saying if your daughter is clearly miserable, if she's clearly not called to be one of those who's serving the temple or serving the kingdom, if you're not in a position to maintain her for the rest of your life, and if it's appropriate socially and spiritually and emotionally for you to give her in marriage, do that. If she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined to keep his heart that he will keep his virgin, he does well. Some manuscripts actually say to keep his virgin daughter. So we have confidence that we're still talking to fathers about how they deal with their daughters. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. And Carrie, that's what you were saying earlier. He is bluntly saying, do not marry somebody who is not a believer. That's, I'm not sure, I don't like this word, but that's stupid.
Oh, no.
And when I talk to the men in the jail, we talked about this several weeks ago, a lot of them, man, they are so in love, but the woman they're in love with is not a believer. And they will do anything they can to convince themselves that, I'm going to get out. She's in love with me. I'm going to start taking her to church. She's going to get saved. And you can say that's stupid, that's stupid, that's stupid, that's stupid. And the mind can be willing, but the flesh is weak. And so Paul is underscoring it. Jesus says, do not be unequally yoked. Paul is saying she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment. And I think I also have the Spirit of God. So he's careful not to say, if you're unmarried, stay that way. But what he is saying is very seriously consider what I'm saying here. If you stay unmarried, you're in a much better position to serve the kingdom. You're in a much better position to spread the gospel. If you're a woman, you're in a much better position to minister to the church. And I don't think we really understand what that looked like 2,000 years ago, but we see over and over again women ministering to Jesus. And we see Anna in the temple day and night. When we read about the widows, assist those who are in the roll, put those on the roll who are serving the Lord. And I don't know if that means that they're scrubbing the floors and keeping the walls clean and I don't know if that's domestic work in the temple. I don't know if that's prayer and fasting as a woman on behalf of the church. I think each woman has to be led by the Spirit of God, just like each man does. And he's saying that if you're not distracted by your home and your children and your husband and those things, you're in a much better, obviously, then you have the capacity to more fully serve the kingdom, to serve the church. We're not serving a temple at this point, but to serve the church, to serve the community, to walk in whatever callings God would put on you in your life.
I think this is sort of compatible when you start thinking about the requirements of being a bishop or a pastor, because it talks about a man whose house is under control, whose children are.
Yes.
So you have to attach those two things here together.
Yes.
Because here it's telling you, if you don't have control over this, then you shouldn't be able to go into the ministry. And then in other parts, it's telling you, okay, he should be a man of this, and less requirement. Once you put those two things together, you realize that not everybody has been called to do it. And I guess a good sign, if we're trying to be biblical here, about who has been called and hasn't been called, is if your household as a man and with a wife and children, if your household is not under control, then you shouldn't be called to ministry until your household is under control. I think this is something that we have to attach together one to the other one.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, obviously, Rahana doesn't go to the jail to spread the gospel in the jail. I go. But when she talks about that ministry, she talks about our ministry, because she's encouraging me, she's making sure I'm prepared, she's waiting for me at home with food. While I'm in the jail, she is praying that I'm filled with the Spirit, that it's God's words that are going forth and not Ted's words, and that God has prepared good soil to receive that, that he might give an increase even in the jails. So, and Paul is wording this pretty strongly, but he is very clearly also saying, if you get married, you don't sin. If you get married, that doesn't mean you go to hell. If you get married, that doesn't mean you can't bear fruit. But just carefully think about the obligations you're putting yourself under. If you do give your daughter in marriage, think about the obligations you're putting her under, that she will be under, to be submissive to her husband and to keep that home and to keep that house and to raise those children and so forth. So again, the real principle is, I think, for us, is that we need to be very carefully thinking about where our time is going, where our energy is going, where our commitments are going, to be sure we don't end up with so many weeds, as Jesus says, that they choke out the fruit and we become unfruitful. Amen.